AI in Action is brought to you by Aldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.aldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Welcome to the Aldus podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Aldus International. In today's podcast, part of the AI in Action series, I'm speaking with Kola Dobrand, Head of Analytics at Lidl. In the podcast, we're going to discuss some of the projects that the team at Lidl are working on and the importance of adding value to the core processes. Kola, it's very, very good to have you on the show today.
Mark, great to be here.
For the listeners, Kola, could you please tell me about your background to now before you joined Lidl and your current role?
Sure, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm currently the head of global analytics at Lidl, and we'll speak a little bit more about what we do here. I joined the team a little less than 2 years ago in early 2019. Prior to that, I spent really the majority of my career in analytics and doing most of that at IBM. I was a member of IBM's Chief Analytics Office for many years, doing a range of projects there, helping to drive transformation initiatives with data-driven capabilities from sales to finance to marketing, really. And I've always, felt very strongly about being a data-driven, analytics-driven type of individual. I've done a few other things though as well. I spent some time in strategy, technology strategy, looking at new and emerging technologies like 5G and edge computing and things like that. So I'm sort of really a passionate technologist myself as well. And I've also had a brief stint in finance at a different company, doing a little bit of sort of more hedge fund type work. But then ultimately always feel drawn back to the technology side of the world.
Tell me a little bit about some of the projects in data science and data analytics within Lidl, because people will know Lidl as a famous retailer with stores around the world, but they're not necessarily going to know too much more about the mission of the data science team and really about, I suppose, that North Star.
You're touching on a really good point, and let me maybe, Lidl is not a kind of company that tends to go out and talk a whole lot about itself. And that's a corporate culture type of thing. So it is actually something that tends to happen a lot in the background. But it is a huge company, right? And this is, to those of you who aren't maybe too familiar, right? We're talking about 11,000 plus stores, something well north of 100 billion in revenues and growing at a quite healthy pace at that. So it is really a big company that even though you tend to only see them in your local region when you walk into a store, and to really understand what we do from an analytics perspective, it's important to kind of take a look at what Lidl's DNA really is, and at the end of the day, the idea behind really the concept behind discount grocery, coming from Germany, being sort of the birthplace of discount grocery, is you're extremely efficient, you're extremely aligned with a high value, low price type of market segment, and you spend really every waking hour trying to deliver more for less and be really focused on that high efficiency, extreme scale. Every cent that we can save, we can deliver back to our customer in savings, right? In lower prices. That kind of DNA is really at the center of Lidl, and that's where we come in, right? What we do with our analytics team here is, at the end of the day, nothing different than what the business executives and business leaders at Lidl have been doing for many years, even before we started. Constantly taking a look at our processes, our structure, our assortment of products, the way we serve our customers, what our customer markets look like, and always looking for that little edge, that little improvement that we can drive, and then scale it out to 11,000 stores, right? If I can deploy a better way of arranging our store, right, the store layout, for example, if I can provide a better way, a more efficient way of bringing our assortment into the store, making the customer shopping experience a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, maybe driving a little bit higher shopping basket because people pick up a little bit more product. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can be euros of benefit, but if I can roll it out to 11,000 stores that are open 6 days a week, 7 days a week in some cases, in 30 European countries, I get that immediate scale effect, right? And so very small changes can have a huge effect, and that's really one of the things that we're really focused on is to say, because for a lot of traditional companies that weren't born on the web, weren't born on the cloud, but came from sort of really almost the pre-IT era, starting to work with data, starting to work with analytics is something they have to learn, right? Something they have to really get comfortable with, and that's not an easy journey. So starting that journey with the core of what the company is all about, to me, is critical, because then immediately we are not those folks out there that kind of do something different that nobody really quite understands what they do, and it sounds fancy, and it's a little hype maybe too, and they're expensive, people. But we're right in the middle of what the board of directors, the senior executives care about. And so, addressing, for example, the efficiency of the store layout and how we make that more optimal is a big part of what we look at. But also, obviously, the supply chain. Being the largest retailer in Europe, we also have the largest supply chain operations across Europe, and sourcing a lot of our store brand products directly from the places where they're grown, where they're produced all over the world means that is a quite complex one.
When you look at the majority of data science projects, depending on who you talk to, 85 to 90% of those projects will fail, or I suppose not make it into production. And a lot of the time, and there's a variety of reasons, but a lot of the time it's because of the problem they're working on isn't that impactful. And if it isn't that impactful, you're not necessarily going to get the buy-in across the business, or it's just not going to be worth doing because the end customer isn't benefited enough to warrant continuing. And there's the concern of, wouldn't it be cool, Snare, where this catches so many people out, or let's use a deep learning model where basic regression will actually do perfectly fine in terms of the work. So my question was, and I think you'd kind of gone into it a little bit with supply chain, was some of the core processes or purchase and sales and supply chain, and some of the problems you're actually looking to utilize data science at Lidl.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of what you said, first of all, I completely agree with, and I've experienced this myself, and some of it is quite amplified at Lidl because of the fact that it is so much focused on efficiency, and efficiency always means trying to cut the fat around the core of what you're doing. And I think most people will know, and it's not a secret that retail is a very thin margin business, right? So it's not a place where you walk around with very big pockets either, so that plays into that as well. But to come to your point, I think a mistake that is often made, in my opinion, is that there's these big projects that get started. There are these big transformational kind of things, lighthouse projects with AI, with analytics, with data science, trying to do something big and transformational, maybe even a new data-driven business model, whatever. They're very complicated, and I think those are the ones that, while they might start with a lot of enthusiasm, a while down the road, people realize it's a lot harder than they thought, and they don't get to the value, and then they get scrapped. What I focused on a lot, and what I think works really well in general, but works especially well at Lidl because of the culture, because of what the company is all about, is to start with really simple, really small things, get them to value really quickly, even though there aren't necessarily the sexy stuff that maybe gets a lot of folks excited when you put them on slides. And one of those is, as you just mentioned, is supply chain, right? If I can shave an hour of a truck at a dock waiting to be loaded, because now instead of figuring out which pallets to load or which truck is a manual process, it's now an automated process because I have an optimization model, mathematically not particularly complicated, that just spits out optimal loading patterns as trucks come in real time for the trucks going out. It's kind of a real-time kind of loading dock that we're talking about here. That's very real, right? An hour of a truck is real money, significant money. And if I do this for 120 trucks a day across 50, 60, 70 of those warehouses, you could do the math. That's not hard to do. That's real money. And we're talking about a project here that can be done in the matter of weeks, if at most a few months, and not a 2-year journey. So it's something that's really quick. It's not the sexy thing. It's not the thing that you go and talk to your board of directors about, right? That you just saved an hour of truck loading time, but it gets you real benefit. It gets you real buy-in at the right level, which is sort of that mid-executive, mid-management, mid-executive level of people that actually sort of control these kinds of things. And then you build it up from there, right? You go to the next one and the next one, make them maybe a little bit bigger. I do believe you need a portfolio ultimately, at least in an organization the size of Lidl, where you have your quick wins, you have your medium size, and you do have your moonshots. You need that, and I do think that's important. But you kind of start there, and you build it up from there, because then you're talking about I've already paid for my team for this year, right? Deliver one project, real cost saving. Team is paid for. We don't have to have that discussion, right? So now we're talking about benefit. We can talk about the next level, and again, I do think that works in almost every organization. But I also do think that you always want to spend a little bit of time in the beginning thinking about what is your organizational culture, your DNA. What is this company really about, and then align how you do data and analytics to that. Really closely align that. And in this case, because Lidl is that kind of efficiency, thin margin, hyperscale organization, doing these small quick wins was even more important to us, right? To get our foot in the door, and I do think it's working, and we are now kind of moving to the next phase of all these projects and kind of tackling some of the more complex stuff as well.
Talk me through some of the challenges you needed to overcome to create value, such as dirty data, inaccessibility of data, making sure you're working on the right problem. And we talked about the problems that you work on,
Yep.
But it is still challenging to know which is the most important problems to work on.
I completely agree with you, right? So I do think I would start there again, right? To sort of figure out what are the initial problems you need to work on, and it does take some time, right? And I do think it takes a healthy dialogue going both ways, and that's what we ended up going through, right? So you need to listen to go in and listen to your business executives, to your business leaders, understand what keeps them up at night is sort of the typical thing that I think a lot of people recognize. And really get into the business problems, right? Not technology problems, not data problems, not IT problems. You need to get into the business problems and understand what drives them and what challenges them. But then you also have to bring in sort of the art of the possible, right? What can you do with data, with analytics? Because what I found is that there's calibration necessary on both ends of the spectrum, right? I think I found on the one hand, yes, there are there's unrealistic expectations out there. People, sometimes expect, analytics and AI to solve, world problems, and they don't understand what it takes behind the scenes. So they come in and say, hey, you can do this real quick, right? And then they get disappointed really quickly. But on the other hand, I've also found a lot of times, I'd easily say half of the time, people just used to think in for example, in reports. People used to think in BI reporting and say, oh, if you can only deliver me a data report that looks like this and like this and like this, I can solve my problem. So we have to get them out of this. Let's stop thinking in reports. Let's start to think in data solutions and analytics solutions and in AI products, right? So you also have to bring in that to get into that conversation. And it's not easy. I don't want to say that, but I think when you go into that dialogue, you'll fairly quickly stumble upon your first 2, 3, or 4 use cases that you can then pick up and go and run with. And then you obviously move on to the more, really well-known types of struggles that, there's yet to be a company that doesn't have them, which is the data is all over the place, the quality isn't right. You started with a data infrastructure as many places that wasn't built for analytics, that was at best built for static type of reporting. Data strategy and data architecture was all around operational processes. There wasn't a long-term vision for how to leverage that data for analytical purposes. You don't have enough history, not enough richness, not enough granularity, because it's not being kept around because it was never needed for the more traditional applications of data. So we started sort of around those. What does work in our favor, which not every company has, is that because Lidl is a highly standardized business model, it actually has a fairly homogeneous set of data underneath, which is good, right? I've seen a lot of places that are, a lot worse than that. But at the same time, it's a retailer, right? It's not a technology company that's sort of used to think in technology and in data. It's more used to thinking in retail and business processes. And I think the other thing, maybe just sort of the last challenge, which is becoming more of a focus now and will continue to be in the focus into the future, is, then you need to get from idea to reality, right? So as hard as it is to do a first idea and do a first prototype, it's even harder to bring that into operations. And again, this is where then the large scale of Lidl, in my instance, comes back to haunt us a little bit, because, even though you can get to great scale when you can get, an hour's worth of savings in a store per day because you made a process more efficient for a store clerk, it is incredibly challenging to roll out this process to 11,000 stores in 30 countries, right? Because you are talking about industrial grade operations of these things, and failbacks if they don't work, and 24-hour, 7 days a week type of operations, etc. So then you're sort of very much into that, and it's one of those things where if the process in the store stops and you stop selling, that's when you have a really, really serious problem, right? In retail. So that's something that you then have to spend a lot of time making it really robust and making sure that doesn't happen. You are not causing that kind of outage in a retail environment, because that would be devastating, right?
Tell us a little bit about how COVID has changed the consumer behavior of shopping.
So I think it's fair to say that in some ways is the $1 million question, right? Probably more than $1 million question. And I know a lot of really smart folks who know retail really well are deep into that question, from the research firms to the big retailers to the consultants working in that field. Probably not surprisingly, we have seen all kinds of fairly common sense effects, in the sense that, more online shopping, more digital payment methods, right? Big uptick in digital payment all across Europe. We've obviously seen the spikes in purchasing. Something that's really changed fundamentally for us is that people come to the store far less frequently, anywhere between 20 and 40% less than they would normally or pre-COVID would, but they buy a whole lot more, right? So much bigger receipts, bigger shopping carts, but a lot fewer trips. And that has a host of interesting implications on our assortment, right? Because there's sort of the kind of grab and go stuff, especially bakery items and things you might just sort of take as you pop into a store, really tough, right? Because people coming a whole lot less. Other things, more deliberate purchases, especially things in the non-food space, where maybe consumers are avoiding that trip to that other store that they would have normally gone to, and now they're trying to pick it up at the grocery, and we have sort of a non-food assortment to cater to that. Big upticks, great, right? So it's really been a light and shadow for us in that sense. And the big question now is, which of those things end up being permanent? And that's really the big question, right? We can pretty clearly see what has changed. That's not too complicated to analyze. The question is, how much of that is going to be permanent, and is it going to be permanent at this level, or something in between? And I think that's what everyone is kind of trying to figure out now, trying to predict, to forecast to some degree, right? And we wouldn't be the only ones doing that. And certainly, the way we would do that would be a very sensitive thing to talk about. But that's really what everyone's after right now, right? What level do we get there?
It's really interesting, because if you want to form a habit, there's a lot of research about the formation of habits. And with COVID, the formation of habits now, there's over 270 days of habit formation. So it's quite interesting what this new world's going to look like, because people have developed so many new habits that are being instilled. So it's really, really interesting to see how this is going to play out. If I just go back to, and it's my final question, some of the interesting projects that you're working on now in the future, such as the loyalty app. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
That is a very exciting field, and maybe just to preface that also very briefly, again, with coming from the strategy, trying to also communicate a bit of a theme here, in my opinion, is incredibly important to come from business strategy for all these things. Really a kind of an interesting step for a discount grocer to begin with, right? Because very well established in some parts of retail for quite a while now, these concepts, loyalty apps, loyalty cards, and the notion that comes with it. But for discount grocery, really kind of a new thing, right? Lidl to some degree is pushing that in Europe at least, because the core value proposition is still low prices, good quality, no frills, and you come in and you get your stuff, and where does a loyalty app sort of play into that? But we are going down that path, and I think it's really exciting because it's really the first time in history for us as a company that we get per purchase granular consumer level buying behaviors, right? Because you have to kind of take a step back from that and look at the history to say this traditionally been two ways we can understand our customers. We can look at our receipts, but we never know which receipt belongs to which customer. So it's always just individual shopping trips and really hard to piece together. Or we use the very well established and common ways of doing panels, right? And you do consumer panels and you have people track their purchases, etc. It's very expensive and always very, very hard to scale, right? Because you're always relying on sort of very manual personal data collection type of methods. And so now for the very first time, we have the ability to track and to understand what people are buying, over a longer period of time, and then offer them the kind of incentives and coupons to keep them with us. And that's really at the end of the day the whole point, right? I don't think comes to surprises anyone that with loyalty programs you're entering into that sometimes explicit, often implicit deal with your consumer to say, I'll get some of your data and you get good deals, better deals, right? You save some money, and you gotta make it attractive enough on the balance that consumers say, yep, that's worth it, right? And that's hopefully an informed consumer choice that they're making. And that's the same idea for us, right? To say, we want to be able to offer you then the kinds of deals that keep you coming back to our store and buying. We don't want to offer you stuff that you would have bought as a staple anyway. I know that this is sort of an interesting point, but if you would have gone and bought it anyway, maybe not that great of an incentive to come. We also don't want to offer you the kind of stuff that you would never buy, right? You may have gotten a coupon before from a retailer where you wonder, like, I would never buy that. Like, that's not an incentive. But you want to hit that sweet spot in between. And in order to hit that sweet spot in between of that buying incentive to say, yep, that's a good reason to go back, you really have to understand what your consumers value. So you really have to look at really what they're buying, what they care about. And there's a lot of room in there. There's a lot of room really also for us, right, to figure out based on the consumer buying patterns and trends at all kinds of different levels, what that sweet spot looks like and how we hit that sweet spot. Because then at the end, if we can hit that sweet spot, then it fits back into the core value proposition of what we do, right? Which is we just simply offer you better value for your money, right? And that includes our loyalty app, right? Loyalty app is also better value for your money. It's not a gimmick, it's not a toy, it's not something to play around with. If it turns out to be that, quite frankly, right, what's the point, right? That's then not going to survive in the long term, but it is really to play into that sweet spot.
Yeah, and being really, really careful about the value you're adding, people are going to continue to trust the brand. And if they continue to trust the brand, they're just going to frequently go there because they know they're going to get a consistent approach, which is really, really good. And then everyone gets further buy-in internally, and then you can start to do more of those moonshots because the consistency is coming true. So it's really, really nice. And I think, leveraging the core value of what Lidl stands for on price, value, and quality, it's really slick if you can get the targeted offers that makes them make probably a different type of purchase, but something that really aligns to their value system. You've been listening to the Aldus podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Aldus International. In today's podcast, part of the AI in Action series, we've been speaking with Kola Dobrant, Head of Data Analytics at Lidl. Thank you very much for your time today, Kola.
Very much appreciate it. Thank you for having me, and have a great rest of your day.
AI in Action is brought to you by Aldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Aldus offer an exec search program. Aldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Aldus advantage. Become a member of the Aldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Aldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Aldus member and get the Aldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.aldus.com. That's www.aldus.com. Aldus International, empowering through AI.